All right, hello class. I hope you're doing well. I just want to talk to you a little bit today about the allegory of the cave. I assigned this text for the primary reason of getting you to understand that it is a perfect explanation of what it takes to come to understanding and to become educated, and you may even say to become enlightened. And when you're starting out your journey in education, in higher education, which many of you are here in a college class, there are some things that you need to know about that process that you may not have heard before, or that you may not have heard put into these terms. So, without further ado, if we'll first take a look at this lovely artist rendition that I have here on the screen. It is pretty well done, showing the allegory of the cave as it is described by Plato. And now we'll move on to the allegory itself. So, first of all, what is an allegory? An allegory is a story that has a double meaning. So, the way that I like to explain allegories is you think of like the ugly duckling, which is a story that we tell little children. And the ugly duckling is a story about these ducks, and one of them is ugly, and then they all grow up, and lo and behold, it turns out he's a swan. And it's a lie that we tell children to convince them that their growing pains are fleeting, and that no, it's a joke, by the way. It's not a lie. Usually, it's true. Your growing pains are part of the natural process of your development, and one day you'll blossom into a beautiful swan. So don't worry so much about your awkwardness now. So we can see that on the surface, it's a story about ducklings, when in actuality, the story has nothing to do with ducklings at all. So similarly, this is a story about some dudes in a cave. But in actuality, it has nothing to do with dudes in a cave. So the question is, what is the allegory of the cave about? Well, they tell you up here at the top. It says, next said I, Socrates, compare our nature in respect of education and its lack to such as an experience of this, as such as this. So this is an allegory to explain the process of education and becoming educated, and the process of leaving the state of ignorance to the state of enlightenment or awareness. So that's the true meaning of it. But then how does the allegory work on a minute level? Before we get started, I want to tell you a story. First, I want to tell you a story about a guy named Socrates. Now, Socrates is the main character situated in this allegory. It was written, of course, by Plato, who's a famous Greek philosopher, and he was a student of Socrates, supposedly. And Socrates' deeds were recorded by Plato as a way to sort of explain philosophy. And this is an excerpt from Plato's work, The Republic. So the story I want to tell you about Socrates has to do with this woman named the Oracle at Delphi. Now, if those of you who have heard of the Oracle at Delphi before know that she was a soothsayer, or she was like a fortune teller, she could see the future. And she would enter these trance states and would bestow knowledge upon people from the trance state. So people would come from all around to talk to the oracle in ancient Greece, asking her all kinds of questions. When should I plant my crops? When should I go to war? Is this a good time to invest in a certain business enterprise? All of these questions would be things that the oracle would be asked, and she would give some manner of divination to answer the question. And a lot of times, according to the ancients anyway, she was correct. And so she gained a lot of notoriety. And the story goes that one day, one of Socrates' friends went to the oracle at Delphi and asked her a question. He said, hey, who is the smartest person in all of Greece? And her answer, it surprised him because he knew the person that she said was the wisest man of all of Greece, and that was Socrates. And so Socrates' friend was like, wow, that's amazing. I know that guy. So he went back to Socrates to tell him, hey, man, you know, the oracle says that you're the wisest man in all of Greece. Now, you would think that Socrates would be like, oh, yes, well, I know. Thank you very much. But in fact, his reaction surprises a lot of people. Instead of using this as a way to gloat and to elevate his own ego, Socrates instead says, no, I'm not. And he sets out to prove the oracle wrong, which is a very difficult thing to do because she's the oracle, by the way. How could she be wrong? So Socrates, in order to prove that he was not the wisest man in all of Greece, he went around seeking out those who those who postured as the wisest people in the society. And this included, priests and politicians and business people and movers and shakers of all different kinds. And he went around, and what he did was he started asking these people questions to try to figure out exactly what it is that they knew. And by doing this, he would figure out which of them was wiser than he was, because surely he was not so wise as to be wiser than all these people. In fact, Socrates was not really a very accomplished guy by social standards. He sort of lived kind of an impoverished life and was really only concerned with the fruits of the intellect. But in any case, he went around asking these people these questions. And after a while, he started to realize that there was a certain point at which his questions would yield the same answer, or that it should have yielded the same answer, which is, I don't know. So if you think about it, if I ask you enough questions, eventually the answer will be, I don't know. Here's an example. Where is the Earth? It's in the solar system. Where is the solar system? It's in the Milky Way galaxy. Where is the Milky Way galaxy? It's in the such and such supercluster. Where is the such and such supercluster? And if you're into astronomy, you might have an answer to that question. But most of us at that point, we go, well, I don't know. I don't know where that is. Could be anywhere. In relation to what, right? So if you ask enough questions, you will see that actually we are operating on a very limited amount of knowledge, and really we know nothing at all, because the nature of reality, the reason that we're here, all of that stuff is unclear to us, right? We really have no idea. We have guesses, and there are people who put forth theories, but nobody can really prove those theories beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so the reality is that we all kind of know nothing. And so Socrates began to realize, as he asked all of these people these questions and they couldn't answer them, that they knew nothing. And he realized that he was indeed the wisest person in all of Greece, but not because he knew more than these people, but because he knew that he knew nothing, and they did not. Consequently, Socrates also irritated a lot of people with this inquiry. He made a lot of people very, very mad. And so he ended up being put on trial and was eventually put to death for the charge of corrupting the youth, which is a very a sad thing to have happened to one of the smarter people in history. But the story is important because it shows us the way people react when they are shown that the things they think they know are actually not true, or that there's more to life or to the universe than they themselves can understand. And that's why the allegory of the cave is so relevant. So moving to the text, the allegory of the cave is written as a dialogue between Socrates and his brother Glaucon. And I'll just read it to you and we'll stop and analyze various parts. So Socrates says, imagine this. People live under the earth in a cave-like dwelling. Stretching a long way up towards the daylight is its entrance, towards which the entire cave is gathered. The people have been in this dwelling since childhood, shackled by the legs and neck. Thus they stay in the same place, so that there is only one thing for them to look at, whatever they encounter in front of their faces. But because they are shackled, they are unable to turn their heads around. A fire is behind them, and there is a wall between the fire and the prisoners. Some light, of course, is allowed them, namely from the fire that casts its glow towards them from behind them, being above and at some distance. Between the fire and those who are shackled, i.e. behind their backs, there runs a walkway at a certain height. Imagine that a low wall has been built the length of the walkway, like the low curtain that puppeteers put up, over which they show their puppets. So now imagine that all along this low wall, people are carrying all sorts of things that reach up higher than the wall, statues and other carvings made of stone or wood, and many other artifacts that people have made. As you would expect, some are talking to each other as they walk along, and some are silent. And at this point, Glaucon interjects. He says, "This is an unusual picture that you are presenting here, and these are unusual prisoners." That's my Glaucon voice. I hope you like it. And Socrates responds, "They are very much like us humans." I, Socrates, responded. So think about this. You have these people in this cave. What does the cave represent? Well, the cave represents the state of ignorance. It is the state to which we are all born into. We only know the cave. We've lived in the cave our entire lives. Now, we know, as sort of readers of this story, that there's a lot more to the universe than just the cave. There's a lot more. There's a lot of stuff outside, and there's even stuff beyond this planet, beyond this star. There's so much out there that the cave is not an accurate representation of reality. Yet, the people who live in the cave don't know any better, and they think that it is reality. More than that, they think that the shadows that they are watching, which are the shadows of these objects passing by, are actually things themselves and not shadows of the thing. So even their perception within the cave is faulted, is wrong, because they are in the state of ignorance. Likewise, the fire represents the limited capacity for knowledge that they have within the cave, and its ability to reveal the truth to them has its limitations. Okay, what the prisoners see and hear. What do you think? From the beginning, people like this have never managed, whether on their own or with the help by others, to see anything besides the shadows that are continually projected on the wall opposite them by the glow of the fire.
How could it be otherwise, since they are forced to keep their heads immobile for their entire lives?
And what do they see of the things that are being carried along behind them? Do they not simply see these, namely the shadows?
Certainly.
Now, if they were able to say something about what they saw and to talk it over, do you not think that they would regard that which they saw on the wall as beings?
They would have to.
And now what if this prison also had an echo reverberating off the wall in front of them, the one that they always look at? Whenever one of the people walking behind one of those in chains and carrying the things would make a sound, do you think the prisoners would imagine that the speaker were anyone other than the shadow passing in front of them?
Nothing else, by Zeus.
All in all, I responded, those who were chained would consider nothing beside the shadows of the artifacts as the unhidden.
That would absolutely have to be.
So when you are in the state of ignorance, when you are in the cave, you believe that your view of reality is correct because you have no frame of reference to determine that it is incorrect. You cannot see the things that are moving behind you and that are casting the shadows. So how would you know that the shadows are not things themselves? You would assume that what you see is what is real, but this is not always the case. This is the way that we all are when we embark upon the journey towards becoming educated and becoming enlightened. So let's move on to the next part of the text. Freedom, stage 1. A prisoner gets free. So now, I replied, watch the process whereby the prisoners are set free from their chains and, along with that, cured of their lack of insight, and likewise consider what kind of lack of insight must it be if the following were to happen to those who were chained. Whenever any of them was unchained and was forced to stand up suddenly, to turn around, to walk, and to look up towards the light, in each case the person would be able to do this only with pain, and because of the flickering brightness would be unable to look at the things whose shadow he previously saw. So when you start to become educated, when you leave the state of ignorance for the first time and turn around to look at the fire, which is knowledge, it will burn your eyes. It will hurt you. Why? Because it will destroy the things that you think are real, and because you will not have the necessary things in place to be able to process this information, to understand the truth as it presents itself to you. So this is interesting because we tell ourselves as a society the truth will set us free, right? But here Plato seems to suggest that the truth will cause you pain, and that doesn't look very good on a greeting card. So it's not what we tell ourselves, but it really is the case. If you think about it, there are a lot of truths in the world that many people would rather not know. You hear the expression, ignorance is bliss. Consider, for example, the atomic bomb. The existence of the atomic bomb is a terrible truth, and yet it is a truth nonetheless. So a lot of people, when they hear that truth, they just choose not to think about it because it's so horrible and it's so disquieting that they don't want to deal with it. This is the case with the prisoner who is looking at the fire. Okay. If all of this were to happen to the prisoner, what do you think he would say if someone were to inform him that what he saw before were mere trifles, but that now he was much nearer to beings, and that as a consequence of now being turned towards what is more in being, he also saw more correctly? And if someone were then to show him any of the things that were passing by and forced him to answer the question about what it was, don't you think he would be at wit's end, and in addition would consider that what he previously saw with his own eyes was more unhidden than what was now being shown to him by someone else? Yes, absolutely. So when you see the truth, you may not even be able to process it. You may not want to process it. You may not be able to process it. It may completely overwhelm you because it is so different from that which you have already known. But the correct thing to do is to go towards it regardless and to try to acclimate and learn how to understand the truth. And if someone even forced him to look at the glare of the fire, would his eyes not hurt him? And would he then not turn away and flee back to that which he's capable of looking at? And would he not decide that what he could see before without any help was in fact clearer than what was now being shown to him? Glaucon says, precisely. Okay. So seeing the truth might make you want to go back to the state of ignorance. You might decide that it's not for you, but here's the thing. Once you've seen that the reality is different from what you already know, there really is no way to go back. You've already been changed. You just haven't been changed to the degree that makes you capable. So, moving on, freedom stage 2. Now, however, if someone using force were to pull him who had been freed from his chains away from there, and to drag him up the cave's rough and steep ascent, and not to let go of him until he had dragged him out into the light of the sun, would not the one who had been dragged like this feel, in the process, pain and rage? And when he got into the sunlight, wouldn't his eyes be filled with the glare? And wouldn't he thus be unable to see any of the things that are now revealed to him as the unhidden?
He would not be able to do that at all, at least not right away.
So there's even another step of understanding truth, and that's to leave the cave entirely. Never mind the things that are within the cave that you've never seen before. There are levels of reality, of truth, that are even beyond that. And to be taken out of the cave, it would be like being abducted by aliens. You wouldn't know how to process any of this. Your eyes would be filled with the glare, and you would be in pain and unable to make sense of any of it. But over time, as we know, we have all had our eyes adjust. You would acclimate to the truth, and that is exactly what happens next, getting used to the light. Socrates says, it would obviously take some getting accustomed, I think, if it should be a matter of taking into one's eyes that which is up there outside the cave in the light of the sun. And in this process of acclimatization, he would first and most easily be able to look at 1, the shadows, and 2, after that, the images of people and the rest of the things as they are reflected in water. Later, however, he would be able to view the things themselves, the beings instead of the dim reflections. But within the range of such things, he might well contemplate what there is in the heavenly dome, and this the dome itself, more easily during the night, by looking at the light of the stars and the moon, and more easily, that is to say, than by looking at the sun and its glare during the day. Glaucon says, certainly. So over time, even though you are overwhelmed by the truth and by the bombardment of knowledge, you will begin to acclimate. You will begin to understand these things. And if you take the time and you persist through the pain and the disquietude, eventually you will gain the means necessary to make sense of what you're looking at, to understand the world as it is within the context of your immediate surroundings. So that is freedom stage 2. Moving on. Freedom stage 3, the sun. But I think that finally he would be in the condition to look at the sun itself, not just at its reflection, whether in water or wherever else it might appear, but the sun itself as it is in and of itself and in the proper place to it, and contemplate of what sort it is.
It wouldn't necessarily happen this way.
And having done all that, by this time he would also be able to gather the following about the sun. 1, that it is that which grants both the seasons and the years. 2, it is that which governs whatever there is in a now visible reason of sunlight, and that it is also the cause of all of those things that the people dwelling in the cave have before their eyes in some way or another.
It is obvious that he would get to these things, the sun and whatever stands in the light, after he had gone out beyond those previous things, the mere reflections and shadows. So eventually you would be able to understand the nature of truth itself, which is the sun. You would develop the framework, you would develop the foundation to be able to understand reality as it is in a much more complicated way than you were when you were in the state of ignorance. And then what? If he again recalled his first dwelling and the knowing that passes as the norm there, and the people with whom he was once chained, don't you think he would consider himself lucky because of the transformation that had happened, and by contrast feel sorry for them? Glaucon says very much so. So this is true, right? At first you're in pain and you want to go back and you want to run away, but once you understand, once you attain enlightenment, you realize that it is better to be enlightened. And you would feel sorry for the people in the cave. Now, this is an interesting idea. Should we feel sorry for the people who are in the state of ignorance? Some people say that ignorance is bliss. So if they're blissful and happy, why would we feel sorry for them? But then if you think about it, people in the state of ignorance are often made to suffer by things that they don't understand. So perhaps it is better to become enlightened. It's an interesting question, and there are lots of ways that we could address it. But moving on. However, what if among the people in the previous dwelling place, the cave, certain honors and commendations were established for whomever could most clearly catch sight of what passes by, and also best remember which of them is normally brought first, which one later, and which ones at the same time? And if there were honors for whoever could most easily foresee which one might come by next? Do you think that the one who had gotten out of the cave would still envy those within the cave, and would want to compete with them who are esteemed and who have power? Or would not he or she much rather wish for the condition that Homer speaks of,
namely, to live on land above ground as the paid menial of another destitute peasant. Wouldn't he or she prefer to put up with absolutely anything else rather than associate with those opinions that hold in the cave and to be that kind of human being? I think that he would prefer to do anything rather than be that kind of human being. Okay, so when you become enlightened, when you attain knowledge, when you attain understanding, you then will see those who are in the state of ignorance as incomprehensible, as apart from you. Even though once you were with them, you will look at them and the world that once made sense to you and which you could once indulge with the same kind of enthusiasm that they do no longer makes sense. And you actually end up pitying them on some level and feeling sorry for them. And maybe you might even be inclined to want to help them and try to bring them out of the state of ignorance. Okay, moving on. This is the part 3, the prisoner returns to the cave. And now, I responded, consider this. If the person who had gotten out of the cave were to go back down again and sit in the same place as before, would he not find in that case, coming suddenly out of sunlight, that his eyes were filled with darkness? Yes, very much so. Now, if once again, along those who had remained shackled there, the freed person had to engage in the business of asserting and maintaining opinions about the shadows, while his eyes are still weak and before they have readjusted, an adjustment that would require quite a bit of time, would he not then be exposed to ridicule down there? And would they not let him know that he had gone up only but in order to come back down into the cave with his eyes ruined, and thus it certainly does not pay to go up? Now, this is an interesting idea too. You will feel sorry for them. You will want to bring them out of the state of ignorance. But when you try, they don't have the means to understand you. They have never been outside of the cave. They have never even looked at the fire. So all of your attempts, you just seem crazy. You seem crazy. You seem like you're from another planet and you're talking about things that they don't understand, and they're just not going to listen to you. And they're going to say, look, this guy's gone crazy. He became educated. He became enlightened. And now we can't even carry on a conversation with him. What a weirdo, right? It's a natural consequence, but it's an unfortunate one. And then you will see it's one that does happen. This happens with a lot of people in history. People like Galileo, for example, or Nicholas Copernicus, or Giordano Bruno even, who was burned at the stake for proposing radical ideas. These people are people who have come out of the cave, seen the light, and gone back down into the cave, only to have the people who can't understand them and can't understand their intention react with scorn and hatred towards them. And as Socrates puts the final outcome, and if they get a hold of this person who takes it in hand to free them from their chains and to lead them up, and if they could kill him, would they not actually kill him? And Glaucon says they certainly will. And of course, when we remember that Socrates himself was put to death for the charge of corrupting the youth, for essentially trying to drag people out of the cave, and that he is not the only one in history that has endured this fate, we realize that this allegory is actually quite accurate. People only understand that which they have the reference and the framework and the discipline to understand. And if you make a point to go beyond and to become enlightened and to come towards reason, you will have to endure these sort of tribulations as the allegory has outlined them. And while you may not be killed by the members of the cave, you will certainly have to endure their incomprehension and oftentimes their disdain as a result of doing what you have to do. But it is better. It is better to leave the cave than to spend your life staring at shadows on the wall. And if you're going to become educated and you're going to reach the best version of yourself, then you should accept this as the truth, and you should come towards the truth no matter what gets in your way. So that's why I make you read this, because I think it is a great way to start to set the tone for your higher education. And I hope that you will all take this allegory to heart, and that it has been at least somewhat informative and enlightening for you. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time of day it is.